So let's move on to the next study. RBT, Heraclitus Laboratories. This is the Reich blood test. And before we go into this, because you are going to play a video, I just wanted to know if you could highlight what you found, because you told me that a lot of these studies were in different languages, and you found out that you felt that there was a language barrier, and that was actually creating some censorship around this material. In other words, it's not available in English, it's not easy to find in English, and we kind of sense that that was done on purpose to make sure that people did not find these particular studies, because they're pretty rare. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. When we were doing this presentation, but also in the past, when we're trying to we're creating a lot of these devices that or products that we're offering, we originally made them for us. Because both of us, we had problems sleeping. Really not hotels, sorry. I lived in apartments that had surrounded by cell towers, 4 or 5 cell towers, and we're living like on the 4th floor, and on beds that had metal springs in them. And if anyone who's electrosensitive, they'll understand that there's a difference between night and day. When you can eliminate those factors, turn off the router, turn off the TV, and you turn off those electrical frequency sources. You get a much better night's sleep than having those things around you. So for that, we started to have to research. What is this thing about orgone energy, and who else is working on it? What are the modern day replications from these experiments? Is there anyone else working on this? And in our research, we found, surprisingly, there's a lot of research being published online by high-tier universities or laboratories outside the United States, but they're in a different language. But I mean, if you look on YouTube, you will find a few people doing it, like in English, but it's like in their garages. It's just average people, but very few are actually doing it that have actually put it on video. And we have found some documentation, like we'll share with you later, with the University of Pennsylvania, where they've actually written down an article in a journal. But generally, yeah, a lot of this stuff is done around the world in different languages like Greek, Portuguese, Russian, and you have to go through that layer of trying to translate. Translate the text and understand what kind of experiment they're replicating, dealing with either bioenergetic experimentation or orgone energy. So what I can do now is, I know Hope is going to share the video dealing with the Heraclitus RBT test, but what I want to first do is share the website that we found that is the group that is responsible for this test. Okay, so this is a group in Greece, and it's called the Hellenic Institute of Orgonomy. Okay, so this institute is actually a group of researchers. Seemingly, some of the videos they've done seems to be translated into Portuguese or Spanish. So it's kind of hard to nail down where the center of the group is. For example, the laboratory, the medical laboratory that you're going to see, I think that might be actually done in Portugal or Spain somewhere with the Reich blood test. But this group basically faithfully replicates Wilhelm Reich bioenergetic experiments, and also the psychology, with sexuality and psychology, and psychological clinical processes, and so there's all kinds of they have a blog post, they have seminars, so basically they try to continue the research of Wilhelm Reich and orgonomy in general. So it's basically, this is the group that has done a very faithful replication of the Reich blood test, the RBT, and basically what the video that Hope is going to play is generally the whole point is basically showing the effectiveness of using an orgone accumulator to show the vitality in blood tests. So basically, when you take a sample of blood out and you take it outside the body, it starts to decay. But if you take a sample of blood and you put it within one of these Orgone accumulators, energy gets into that's stored in the accumulator, gets transferred into the sample of blood, and it takes longer for that blood sample to decay. All right, and we're talking astounding numbers, like it takes 70% longer for the blood to actually break down into its fundamental particles, which are called bions. And the effects of blood, when it breaks down, it loses the red blood cells loses its nice round shape. It starts to go blotchy and spiky. It's called blebbing. It's a very common term used for blood that's decomposing or is degrading through things like pathogens and things. Well, basically, those effects don't happen until much later. It's as if the blood is taking on more energy and more vitality because it's within this orgone, this ORAC, this chamber. And so again, this is just an experiment to replicate what Wilhelm Reich did decades ago. And this group replicated that successfully, and that's what we're going to show you.
Okay, so this video, by the way, for the people that are listening to the podcast of this, I've gone ahead and done a voiceover in English on top of what she is saying in a different language, just to help people understand what is being covered here. So here we go. Hello, my name is Despina Malkatsi. I am a medical lab technician and in charge of the Heraclitus Microscopic Research Laboratory, which is under the direction of the psychiatrist and Orgone therapist Nassos Tiopoulos, MD. Follows is the presentation of our research project regarding the experimental investigation of the microscopic observations made by the physician and natural scientist Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich's varied body of work crosses over many scientific disciplines, but part of his work has been insufficiently investigated using strict scientific procedures. We believe that Reich's theory deserves an unbiased scientific investigation, since research in our laboratory has convinced us of the validity of his observations. One of our lab's major projects is the Reich blood test, RBT. It is a laboratory examination evaluating the vigor and the bioenergetic charge of a person's red blood cells. The RBT can detect biopathic situations that are active in the organism, without, however, arriving at a specific diagnosis. The RBT is based on the direct observation of blood immediately after its extraction from the body's vessels, without any biochemical processing. According to Reich, as soon as the red blood cells leave the vessels, they begin disintegrating into cysts. Reich called these cysts bions. He observed that bions pulsated, were mobile, and in a healthy organism, they gave off an intense blue light. Classic biology describes bions as characteristic protrusions of the cell membrane, calling this phenomenon blebbing. In bions, Reich recognized a very primitive and undifferentiated stage of the living state, which he described in detail in his book, The Bion Experiments, with numerous experiments conducted in Oslo between 1936 and 1939. He showed the bionic disintegration of living and non-living matter, and the subsequent organization of bions, and formations manifesting characteristics of living functioning. Later on, you will watch the comparative disintegration of two blood samples, taken simultaneously from the same person. Then one of them is placed in the device Reich called the Orgone accumulator, or ORAC, while the other is placed in a simple box made of only organic material. For this procedure, we use an Orgone accumulator with 3 layers measuring 35 by 35 by 35 centimeters. A control box of similar dimensions, a 3-layer Orgone blanket, a small metal box, and our laboratory microscope, a Zeiss Axioscope 2. We use a magnification of 1600 times, but when there is a need for more detailed observation of the sample, we use a magnification of 4,000 times. The blood used in the test is taken from the capillaries. The materials used are all sterilized. In order to avoid early destruction of the red blood cells due to contamination, the hands of the tested person are thoroughly washed with soap and well rinsed, especially the fingertips where the blood is drawn from. We need 2 blood samples, so we prepare 2 slides, on which we mix blood with saline at a ratio of 1:40 and then place a cover slip. Our main concern when conducting this test is to obtain the red blood cells in their natural condition. If the erythrocytes are destroyed, the samples are considered unsuitable. So before proceeding with the test, we always check the red cells microscopically. After that, one slide is placed in the Orgone accumulator for 15 minutes, while the other one is put in the control box, also for 15 minutes. Then the 2 samples are microscopically examined successively at the same time. We observe the processes occurring in the red blood cells during their death and their ongoing decay. Every 5 minutes, we observe and record the following qualitative characteristics of the erythrocytes: vigor, pulse, and mobility, width of energy field, rate of disintegration into bions, bion size and bion distribution in the inner part of the cell disk. The goal of the examination is to find differences in the 2 samples, as regards to the erythrocytes characteristics mentioned above. In this way, we determine the effects of the different conditions existing in the 2 boxes on the red blood cells. The 2 samples are checked successively at the same time and recorded on video. Let us now compare the processes taking place in the microscopic fields of the 2 samples and observe their differences. On the left is the ORAC sample. On the right is the control sample. This is 20 minutes after blood draw. In both samples, the red blood cells show good mobility and pulse. The rate of disintegration was calculated at about 1%. This is 25 minutes after blood draw. Both samples still show motility and pulse. The red blood cells in the control blocks show loose membranes, and amount of disintegration is 2 to 3%. The amount of disintegration for the red blood cells in the accumulator is about 1%. This is 40 minutes after blood draw. The red blood cells kept in the control box still show pulsation, but most of them are immobile, and the percentage of disintegration is 2 to 8%. The red blood cells kept in the accumulator continue to show motility and pulsation, and their disintegration is 2 to 3%. This is 50 minutes after blood draw. The differences between the 2 samples examined are even more obvious. The red blood cells kept in the control box show a disintegration of 40 to 50%, while the ones in the accumulator of only 5%. From the findings of the microscopic examination of the 2 samples, we observe the following. The red blood cells kept in the accumulator showed motility for longer time. Their disintegration into bions was slower, and their membrane tension was also preserved for a longer time. The above findings, as well as more data, were collected during the examination. Of the red blood cells of 10 individuals for 4 times each at different weather conditions, we observed the following. The red blood cells kept in the accumulator showed more motility at a rate of about 60 to 70%. The rate of disintegration into bions was slower by 70%, and the bion size was larger at a rate of about 90%. We also observed that when the humidity of the environment was high, the differences at the quality characteristics of the red blood cells in the 2 boxes were greatly smaller. In conclusion, we can say that the Orgone accumulator has a clear biological effect on the blood, examined with the method of the Reich blood test, improving the vigor of the red blood cells. So when I see something like that, it appears as though Orgone energy is almost like the fountain of youth because it preserves the blood cells. And this would explain as to why it preserves food, it preserves living matter. Tavon, I wanted to ask you, because what we were looking at in that video was an Orgone accumulator box. And can you describe what that box is and what's the difference between a Orgone accumulator box and an orgonite device?
Yes, so like we mentioned earlier, when Reich first started trying to get data about what this new field, Orgone field, he termed it, to nowadays it's called scalar field, torsion field, as coined by the Russians. He had to create devices that were able to either gather or collect this field like an accumulator. And so he created these boxes. Him and his team created these boxes where the walls of the box were alternating layers of a ferromagnetic metal like steel or iron, sheets of that in between where you have an insulative layer of plastic or some organic material, something with a carbon chain. So plastic, steel wool, cotton, something like that. And when you had these alternating layers where basically the metal would attract or absorb this particular complex field, and the insulating layers would reflect it. When you had alternating layers like a capacitor as a wall, to make a box out of this stuff, he found that this Orgone energy was being stored inside the accumulator. And he went on to record these other experiments that have been replicated by others for even things, if you want to get this, energy extraction. But basically, another way of measuring this field was a constant temperature difference from what's inside the box, the temperature inside the box, to the temperature that is outside in the environment. And so this test, again, has been replicated. Basically, you'll get a 0.5 degree, a 0.5 degree centigrade difference, standing difference, no matter what the conditions are, from what's inside the box versus outside the box, to show conclusively that there is a field in there of some kind that is accumulated from, depending on how you make these boxes. And so this field is basically anything that's inside that field, in that chamber, in that environment, absorbs that, it interacts with that field, and is given or takes on this vitality, which has healing properties. Basically charges up whatever is in there, whether it be blood, seedlings, which we're going to talk about in the University of Pennsylvania study, water, especially water, because water records information, as you can, has been discussed by other people dealing with structured water. This field has amazing properties, and it charges whatever is inside of it. Now, so this interaction, this discovery from Wilhelm Reich has been advanced over the decades until recently, in the past 10, 15, 20 years, where people were thinking, right, if it comes down to layers of certain materials that are able to channel this field through the layers, with these alternating layers of metal and non-metal, if you were to zoom in at the microscopic level, then you can do this with particulates, files, shavings, powders, where those are the metals, and you can have it in epoxy resin, so that, again, a field from the outside environment, if it goes through that matrix, you're hitting metal, non-metal, metal, non-metal, and you're getting the same effect. And effectively, today that's been called orgonite, or we can call it harmonizers. Again, the same type of technology, where you have this composite. It's called a composite. It's a matrix of material, normally made from a thermoplastic, and these thermoplastic have particulates in them that are metallic, have a ferromagnetic component to them. People are adding things like also quartz crystal as well, so now you have a piezoelectric effect that seems to have a beneficial, makes that composite more effective. And so now you have like an orgone accumulator that's effectively turned inside out. There's no inner chamber, but you have the alternating layers. So now you have this device sitting there with these particulates inside, and what comes out on the other end, all around it is this field. And if you have it in the form of a plate, then this field that's around it tends to be stronger on the faces of the plate, above it and below it. So if you have a plate of this material and you set your seeds on it, if you set fruits and vegetables on it, if you set your drinks on it, they're going to absorb some of the energy from that standing field. Now again, this field isn't generated on its own, it's coming from the environment. So if your environment is absorbing radiation from the sun, RF radiation coming from the soup of Wi-Fi that we all live in now, all these external sources of energy are being transformed when it comes across this material. This is what Reich discovered. And with the right materials, this transformed field has healing properties. And it's passive because it's simply transforming what's already there. So it works 24/7. You don't need to, despite what some of the more new agey, the take on some of this, you don't need to charge it. You don't need to do anything else with it. Once you've made this device, it sits there and it transforms the energy in the environment around that device 24/7.
So with that said, something else that this particular type of orgone energy and these devices can help with is sleeping. So I wanted to share with everybody our next product we'd like to tell you about, which is our Orgone Energy sleeping pods. These are extremely popular. They started back when because I suffered from insomnia for many years. And, for me, it was because of sensitivity to EMFs, because of Wi-Fi and, spring mattresses with metal in them and signals being beamed around. I was very, very sensitive to these things. And so I asked Tavon if he could please make me a sleeping pod, because at first he made the pendant for me, and the moment I put the pendant on, I felt this overwhelming calm come over me. And so I said, this would be great if you could make something a little bit bigger that had a little more presence, And so we came out with these sleeping pods, and they're perfect. They have a nice smooth design, and we do sell them a single pod or a set of 2. So if you are interested, you can order your sleeping pods at the link below, or go to ftwproject.com and click on our shop or on our special offers, and you'll see the offers for sleeping pods there. And again, every single piece is completely handmade by Tavon in our workshop in Morocco, and worldwide shipping is included with every one of our special offers.